Picture this, a city skyline shrouded in thick, black smoke. On one of its arterial streets, a bus, engulfed in roaring flames, blocks any escape. Its metal frame curls, tires melt. The heat is feral, alive. In Culiacán that day, the scent of burning rubber and scorched steel didn't just choke the air, it ignited fear. Bullet holes punctured car doors. Windshields shattered. The street became a shrine to chaos. Then the gunmen moved in, pickup after pickup with mounted machine guns. They rolled like beasts of war across the boulevards. Smoke billowed, darkening the sky like an eclipse. Plumes from burning vehicles towered over familiar rooftops. Roads blocked. Streets turned into traps. Cars, trucks, buses, piled and set aflame. Entrances sealed. Exits barred. Citizens became hostages in their own city. Then the soldiers, uniformed and trained, began to pull back. Retreat. Tactical withdrawal turned into cornered confusion. Chaos wasn't contained by one block, it spread. Entire neighborhoods trembled under the roar of rifles. A teenager huddled behind a toppled table in a storefront. His knuckles whitened as he gripped a broken beam. Meanwhile, not far away, the prison gates buckled. Guards overwhelmed, doors forced open. Strategic points, once symbols of control, turned fragile, government buildings under siege, military command centers threatened. Rumors raced faster than bullets. Voices spread across WhatsApp, radio channels, talk of kidnappings, vengeance, retaliation. The whispers said, "They've taken soldiers' families." Whether truth or terror, the message was clear, the beast was personal. On the asphalt, spent casings glittered. A .50 caliber round thudded into silence. Every shell casing, a token of dominance. Every echo, a war drum. Reinforcements mobilized, troops moving in, but the city was changed. The attempt to capture Ovidio Guzmán, the son of El Chapo, ignited a blaze the state couldn't control. As night cloaked the city, its spirit lay scarred. And then, silence. So here's the question you can't escape: how did one cartel force an entire government to surrender? This is Culiacán. And this was Black Thursday. You're watching True Crime Cartel Originals. Before we dive into today's story, I have a small favor to ask. If you love deep, real stories like this, tap like. It only takes a second and helps us keep bringing you the truth. Hit subscribe to follow the channel. We uncover the hidden realities of cartel violence and untold crimes that shape Mexico and the world. Comment below and tell us which city you're watching from. Your voice connects us with the global community following these stories. Your support helps more than you know. Now, let's get into the story. To understand the night Culiacán surrendered, you first need to understand the city itself. Culiacán isn't just a dot on a map, it is the heart of Sinaloa. A place where palm trees sway under desert heat, and mountains loom in the distance like sentinels guarding secrets. On the surface, life here moves like any other Mexican city. Families gather in plazas. Children laugh as they chase soccer balls down narrow streets. Street vendors shout about fresh tacos al pastor. Music drifts from every corner bar, narco corridos, songs that celebrate the outlaw life. But beneath the music, beneath the laughter, there is a truth everyone knows but few say out loud: Culiacán is a city built on cartel money. Its lifeblood isn't just culture, it's cocaine, meth, heroin, and fentanyl flowing north, flooding the United States, poisoning millions. Here, narcos aren't phantoms. They are neighbors. They own the biggest houses, drive the most expensive cars, and sit in the best seats at soccer games. For decades, the Sinaloa Cartel has ruled not just through fear, but through presence, through power, through visibility. And at the top of it all, once, stood Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán. The kingpin who turned Sinaloa into the epicenter of global drug trafficking. His shadow stretches across every alley, every corridor, every whispered deal in the city. But when El Chapo was captured, the empire did not crumble. It fractured. And from those fractures came his sons, the Chapitos. Young, ruthless, eager to prove they could fill the void their father left behind. Ovidio Guzmán Lopez, quiet and calculating, became one of the most wanted among them. To the government, Ovidio was the target. A chance to strike at the very core of the cartel. But to Culiacán, he was something else. Proof that no matter how many times the state tried to bring down the cartel, another Guzmán was always waiting. People here knew that taking a Guzmán was never simple. Because the Guzmáns didn't just control territory, they controlled loyalty. From bodyguards to foot soldiers, from dealers to street lookouts, and even some officials sworn to fight them. Every corner store clerk, every taxi driver, every neighborhood kid, someone, somewhere, was reporting back. In Culiacán, eyes are everywhere. Whispers feed into the cartel like veins into a heart. Still, on that October morning in 2019, Mexican forces thought they had the upper hand. Intelligence had led them to Ovidio. His routine, his hideout, his guard. A plan was set. The mission, capture Ovidio Guzmán alive. But in Culiacán, nothing is ever so simple. The city may have looked calm, children walking to school, buses weaving through traffic, vendors opening their stalls. Yet under the surface, it was a powder keg. All it needed was a spark. And that spark was coming. The capture of Ovidio Guzmán was about to change everything. For the soldiers, it was a mission. For the cartel, it was war. And for the people of Culiacán, it was a nightmare about to unfold. That day, October 17, 2019, would become known as Jueves Negro, Black Thursday. The day a cartel unleashed hell to defend its prince. The day an entire city learned who really ruled. The stage was set. The soldiers moved. Ovidio waited. And Culiacán held its breath. And when the first shots rang out, history itself would bend. October 17, 2019. It was late morning when the convoy rolled into Culiacán. Trucks packed with heavily armed Mexican soldiers moved quietly through traffic, their mission clear, their destination precise, the home where Ovidio Guzmán was believed to be hiding. This was no ordinary raid. The soldiers knew exactly who their target was. Ovidio Guzmán Lopez, one of Los Chapitos, heir to El Chapo's empire, the man flooding fentanyl into the United States. Capturing him meant striking at the heart of the cartel. But it also meant poking a sleeping beast. The plan was simple on paper. Surround the house. Move in fast. Secure Ovidio. Extract him before the city even realized what happened. But in Culiacán, nothing ever goes according to plan. The soldiers closed in. Engines cut. Boots hit the ground. The streets outside looked ordinary, neighbors watering plants, kids walking home from school, stray dogs weaving between cars. But inside that house, history was about to be rewritten. They moved to the door. Breach team ready. Rifles raised. A signal was given, then silence shattered. Ovidio Guzmán was inside. Not in a mansion, not surrounded by gold and luxury, but in a modest home, guarded by a handful of men. And when soldiers stormed the room, he did not go out in a blaze of glory. He froze. They forced him to the ground. Shackled his hands. A camera phone captured his face, calm, almost resigned, as if he knew this was only the beginning. Within minutes, news spread like wildfire. Ovidio Guzmán, captured. The son of El Chapo, in custody. For the Mexican government, it looked like a victory. For the cartel, it was a declaration of war. In Culiacán, lookouts saw the soldiers move. Messages flew across encrypted radios, WhatsApp groups, walkie-talkies. A single word repeated over and over, Levantamiento, they've taken him. And then, the city woke up. Convoys of sicarios mobilized. Pickup trucks with mounted machine guns tore through streets. Heavily armed men flooded intersections, blocking exits, setting up roadblocks. Culiacán was no longer a city, it was a battlefield waiting to erupt. At the military base, radio chatter turned frantic. The soldiers had Ovidio. But outside, thousands of armed men were closing in. And in Culiacán, the cartel always moves faster than the state. Ovidio, still in custody, made a chilling request. He told soldiers to let him call his brothers. His calm demeanor concealed a truth the troops were only beginning to realize: Ovidio was not their prisoner. They were his. Within minutes, cartel forces encircled the entire city. Checkpoints burned. Gunfire echoed. Civilians ran for cover. It wasn't a rescue, it was an invasion. The Sinaloa Cartel was pulling Culiacán into hell to free one man. And for the first time, soldiers holding Ovidio began to ask themselves, who is really surrounded here? The capture of Ovidio Guzmán was supposed to be a victory. Instead, it was the match that lit the fuse. The city of Culiacán was about to explode, and the government had no idea what it had unleashed. It began slowly. First, bursts of gunfire in the distance. Then, like dominoes, the city fell into chaos. By early afternoon, Culiacán was no longer in the hands of civilians or the state. It belonged to the Sinaloa Cartel. Convoys of sicarios poured into the streets, men armed to the teeth with AK-47s, Barrett .50 caliber rifles, even armored trucks. Their movements weren't random. They were coordinated, surgical, executed with terrifying precision. This wasn't just rage, it was strategy. They blocked every exit out of the city. Highways, intersections, bridges, all sealed off with burning vehicles. No one was going in, and no one was coming out. Culiacán had been transformed into a fortress of fire. Soldiers returning to base came under ambush. Gunfire rattled from rooftops. RPGs slammed into military vehicles. In broad daylight, the army was outgunned in its own streets. And caught in the middle were civilians. Families trapped in traffic, parents shielding their children, shop owners locking metal shutters as bullets tore through storefronts. Every block became a battlefield. Cartel snipers perched on rooftops. Checkpoints were manned not by police, but by teenagers carrying assault rifles. Ordinary citizens looked out their windows and saw a nightmare unfold. Helicopters thundered overhead, circling the city. But even the air wasn't safe. Sicarios opened fire with .50 caliber rifles, forcing the aircraft to climb higher, retreating from the kill zone. Inside their command posts, soldiers were overwhelmed. Radio transmissions painted a picture of disaster: we're surrounded. They've blocked the streets. We're under heavy fire. Every call sounded more desperate than the last. And while the city burned, the cartel delivered its most chilling message yet: they weren't just fighting soldiers, they were targeting families. Word spread that gunmen had kidnapped relatives of military personnel. A silent ultimatum: release Ovidio, or innocent blood will flow. The siege grew fiercer. Gunmen advanced block by block, unleashing waves of fire so relentless that soldiers were pinned down, unable to move. By late afternoon, Culiacán looked less like a city, and more like a war zone. Shops were looted, vehicles stolen for roadblocks, civilians forced from their cars at gunpoint. Every inch of the city now obeyed one command: free Ovidio Guzmán. Even hardened soldiers, men trained for combat, began to feel it. The realization that they weren't facing a gang, they were facing an army. An army that answered to no law, no authority, no fear of consequence. As dusk fell, the nightmare only grew darker. Fires illuminated the skyline. Explosions echoed across neighborhoods. Thousands of civilians cowered in homes, praying for it to end, not knowing who truly controlled their fate. In the middle of it all sat Ovidio Guzmán. Calm. Silent. As the world around him spiraled into chaos, he knew what the soldiers were beginning to understand: he was no prisoner. He was the most powerful man in the city, even in handcuffs. And with the city under siege, soldiers facing death at every corner, and civilians begging for relief, the government of Mexico faced a decision no nation should ever make: do they hold the son of El Chapo? Or do they surrender to the cartel? While the streets of Culiacán descended into chaos, another battle was raging, not with bullets, but with words. Inside command centers and government offices, Mexico's leaders were confronted with the impossible: hold Ovidio Guzmán, or unleash catastrophe on their own people. Military commanders radioed updates that sounded less like reports, and more like cries for help. We are surrounded. We are outgunned. Casualties are mounting. Each message was a dagger into the fragile resolve of the state. The President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, hundreds of miles away, was suddenly pulled into the most critical decision of his presidency. His generals briefed him: if we don't release Ovidio, this could turn into a massacre. The army had captured Ovidio by surprise, but they hadn't prepared for the cartel's retaliation. The streets weren't just dangerous, they were completely lost. Every neighborhood was a kill zone. Every highway was controlled by sicarios. Families of soldiers were being targeted. Cartel operatives were calling officers directly: we know where your children go to school. Release him, or we kill them. It wasn't just a war outside, it was psychological warfare inside the barracks. One general asked a chilling question: are we ready to sacrifice civilians, soldiers, and families, all for one prisoner? The room fell silent. Because they all knew the truth, Culiacán was slipping away by the minute. As the siege intensified, Mexico's leaders weighed options. Call for reinforcements? Impossible. Every entry route into Culiacán was blocked. Deploy airstrikes? Unthinkable. Civilians were everywhere. The list of choices grew shorter. The clock ticked louder. Inside the city, the soldiers guarding Ovidio were terrified. They held one of the most dangerous men in the world, but outside, thousands of gunmen were prepared to slaughter the city to set him free. Even the captors whispered to each other: what do we do now? Ovidio himself remained eerily calm. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply said, call my people. You know what they're capable of. It was less a plea, and more a prophecy. By late evening, the pressure was unbearable. Entire neighborhoods were ablaze. Civilians live-streamed the battles, the whole world watching as Mexico seemed powerless against its own monsters. In Mexico City, President López Obrador made his decision. He called it responsibility. Critics would later call it surrender. The order was clear: release Ovidio Guzmán. Save lives today, even if it meant losing face forever. Back in Culiacán, soldiers received the command. The atmosphere was heavy, like a funeral. They walked into the room where Ovidio sat, eyes downcast, hands shaking. And they told him, you're free to go. The news spread instantly. Gunfire slowed. Convoys pulled back. The siege that had gripped an entire city began to dissolve, as if a switch had been flipped. The cartel had won. But in truth, it was more than just a city that surrendered. It was the government. It was the rule of law. And it was a message broadcast to the world: the Sinaloa Cartel was untouchable. And as silence returned to the streets of Culiacán, one question echoed louder than the gunfire ever did: if the government could not defeat the cartel here, what chance did they have anywhere else? The gunfire stopped. The smoke began to clear. But Culiacán was not at peace. It was in shock. A city of over 800,000 people had just witnessed something no one thought possible: the government of Mexico had bowed down to the Sinaloa Cartel. Videos flooded social media within minutes. Families hiding under tables. Soldiers retreating. Cartel gunmen celebrating in the streets. The whole world could now see Mexico's nightmare, in real time. News networks picked up the story instantly. The cartel forces Mexican government to release drug lord's son. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, the headlines were identical. This wasn't just a local battle anymore. This was international humiliation. In Washington, officials were stunned. The U.S. had spent decades pushing Mexico to fight cartels. Billions of dollars in aid, endless training missions, cooperation between DEA and Mexican forces. And now? The cartel had outgunned an entire army, and won. Critics slammed the decision as surrender. How could a government release the son of El Chapo? Political rivals accused the president of cowardice. Editorials called it a disaster. And in Mexico's streets, people whispered what they had always feared: the cartels were stronger than the state. But in Culiacán, the aftermath looked very different. The cartels celebrated their victory. Gunmen filmed themselves smiling, shouting into cameras, firing shots into the sky. For them, this wasn't just a rescue. It was a message: we run this city. And for ordinary citizens, fear turned into bitter resignation. They had seen who truly held the power. Some quietly admitted, the government abandoned us. Others muttered, at least the killing stopped. It was a victory soaked in shame. International newspapers plastered the story across their front pages. The day the cartel defeated Mexico. Analysts warned that if a government couldn't even hold one man, what chance did they have against entire organizations with armies of their own? Inside Mexico's military, the mood was worse than defeat. Soldiers who had risked their lives felt abandoned, betrayed by their own commanders. Many asked quietly, what was the point of fighting, if our leaders will always back down? President López Obrador defended the decision. He said, the lives of the people come first. We could not allow a massacre. To him, it was pragmatism. To others, it was weakness. And weakness in the world of cartels is blood in the water. In the United States, lawmakers seized on the chaos. They argued Mexico had lost control, that cartels were no longer criminal groups but paramilitary forces. Some even suggested direct U.S. intervention if Mexico could not contain its own cartels. Meanwhile, the Sinaloa Cartel's reputation grew larger than ever. This wasn't just about Ovidio Guzmán. It was about power, fear, and dominance. They had forced the Mexican government to its knees, and the entire world had witnessed it. Behind closed doors, intelligence agencies feared the ripple effect. If Sinaloa could do this, what would stop other cartels from copying their playbook? The balance of power had shifted, not toward governments, but toward the underworld. And for the families of Culiacán, the scars were permanent. Children would forever remember the day their schools became battlegrounds. Parents would never forget the sound of gunfire outside their doors. Trauma, fear, and silence became part of daily life. The battle ended in hours. But the consequences will last for generations. Because the cartel didn't just win a fight. They won something much larger, the belief that they cannot be defeated. The day after the battle, Culiacán's streets were quiet, but not in the way a city recovers from tragedy. It was the quiet of submission. People whispered about what they had seen, about how the government had bowed to the cartel. And in that silence, the legend of the Sinaloa Cartel grew louder than ever. For the Sinaloa Cartel, the battle wasn't just about freeing Ovidio Guzmán. It was about sending a message: we don't lose. And in the aftermath, that message was repeated in music, in videos, in whispers across Mexico. The government's defeat was the cartel's greatest propaganda weapon. Narco corridos, ballads glorifying drug lords, spread like wildfire. Singers wrote verses overnight, praising the bravery of the sicarios, the chaos they unleashed, the humiliation of the army. The music carried across radios, cell phones, parties, even weddings. Within days, the Culiacanazo was transformed into a song of victory. On social media, the cartel's myth only grew. Dozens of videos surfaced, convoys of armored trucks, gunmen waving banners, families cheering when soldiers withdrew. Whether staged or not, these clips painted one undeniable picture: the people of Culiacán had seen who truly ruled their city. And yet, the truth was far more complicated. Many civilians didn't cheer. They cried, they prayed, they feared what would come next. But fear is a powerful silencer, and silence can easily be mistaken for loyalty. In Sinaloa, the cartel's dominance was not just respected, it was normalized. To many, Ovidio Guzmán wasn't just a criminal. He was the son of El Chapo, a symbol of local pride, a continuation of the Guzman dynasty that had fed, protected, and punished this land for decades. Graffiti appeared almost overnight. Messages like Bienvenido a la tierra del Chapo, welcome to Chapo's land. Murals of El Chapo and Ovidio decorated walls. The streets themselves became monuments to cartel mythology. For the cartel's enemies, this was devastating. Rivals saw not just a criminal enterprise, but a military force capable of overpowering the state itself. The message to competitors was clear: Sinaloa was untouchable. But it wasn't just cartels watching. The world's most powerful criminal organizations were taking notes. From Colombia to Italy, whispers spread: if Sinaloa could force Mexico to surrender, what could we do in our countries? And then came the celebrations. Not in public squares, not under government approval, but in quiet gatherings, private homes, and hidden fiestas. Gunmen toasted with expensive tequila. Narco corridos blasted until dawn. For them, this was a coronation. Ovidio had been saved, and the cartel had never looked stronger. But what made the cartel's victories so dangerous was the story people began telling themselves. The story that no matter how strong the government is, no matter how many soldiers they send, no one can break Sinaloa. That story spread faster than bullets. And stories, once believed, are harder to kill than men. In the barrios, children played games pretending to be sicarios, not soldiers. Ovidio's name became part of their slang, his escape treated like folklore. The myth passed down faster than the facts, and myths last longer. Meanwhile, the Mexican government tried to spin the story. Officials repeated that they had acted to save lives, that releasing Ovidio was an act of responsibility. But no matter what they said, the images told the real story: burned buses, defeated soldiers, triumphant cartel gunmen. And images speak louder than press releases. The cartel didn't just win a battle. They won the narrative. And in the end, that might have been their greatest victory. Governments come and go. Presidents are elected and replaced. But myths? Myths endure. And in October of 2019, the myth of Sinaloa became immortal. But as their legend grew, so did their enemies. Because for every myth of invincibility, there are those who wait in the shadows to prove it wrong. While the Sinaloa cartel celebrated, the Mexican government scrambled. The images of soldiers retreating, civilians trapped in crossfire, buses burning in the streets, these were not just signs of chaos. They were proof. Proof that the state had lost control. Proof that the cartel had won. And the government knew it. Within hours of Ovidio Guzmán's release, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador faced the press. He claimed the decision to free El Chapo's son was made to protect civilian lives, to prevent a massacre. On the surface, it sounded noble. But to many, it sounded like surrender. Reporters pressed for details. How many soldiers were deployed? Who gave the order to release Ovidio? Why wasn't the operation planned better? The government's answers shifted from day to day. At first, they claimed the operation was a routine patrol gone wrong. Later, they admitted it was a coordinated attempt to capture Ovidio. Each version contradicted the last. Even worse, the government first denied that Ovidio had ever been arrested. Only after videos surfaced of him surrounded by soldiers did they backtrack. The world now knew, the government had lied. For the Mexican people, the humiliation was overwhelming. Their army, one of the largest in Latin America, had been forced to its knees by cartel gunmen. Citizens asked themselves, if the government couldn't protect Culiacán, could it protect anyone? In Congress, opposition leaders demanded accountability. They accused AMLO of weakness, of putting cartel lives above civilians, of betraying the nation. Some even called the Culiacanazo the day Mexico surrendered. But AMLO doubled down. He defended his decision, insisting that no criminal, not even Ovidio Guzmán, was worth the lives of hundreds of civilians. He said the choice was between a bloodbath and peace, and he chose peace. Many applauded his words. But others asked, was it really peace, or was it fear? Behind the scenes, the military was furious. Soldiers felt betrayed, abandoned by their own government. They had risked their lives only to be ordered to release the man they had captured. For them, the message was clear: their sacrifice was meaningless. And as the government scrambled, the United States was watching closely. American intelligence agencies demanded answers. How could the Mexican army, trained and armed with U.S. support, be humiliated by cartel gunmen? For Washington, the surrender was not just Mexico's shame, it was a threat to America's war on drugs. In Mexico, conspiracy theories spread. Some whispered that Ovidio had bribed his way out. Others claimed high-ranking officials had cartel ties and ordered the release. Few believed the official version. And in a country where corruption runs deep, suspicion felt more real than truth. The shame of Culiacán wasn't just political. It was psychological. Mexicans had seen with their own eyes that the state could be overpowered, that their leaders could be forced into submission. The social contract, the fragile trust between people and government, had been broken. International media headlines were brutal. Mexico surrenders. Cartel defeats the state. The Battle of Culiacán. The government tried to spin the story as a humanitarian decision, but the world had already decided: Mexico had lost. AMLO, a president who had campaigned on peace and ending Mexico's drug war, now faced his greatest test. His policy of hugs, not bullets, was ridiculed. To many, it seemed like the cartels had received the hugs, while the people got the bullets. And so, the government's shame only deepened. The more they spoke, the more contradictions emerged. The more they explained, the more people doubted. For every excuse, there was video evidence to the contrary. For every defense, there was a headline mocking them. And in the core of public opinion, the government had already lost. But humiliation has consequences. And in the world of cartels, weakness invites predators. As Mexico's leaders stumbled, rivals of the Sinaloa Cartel began plotting. The war was far from over. The shame of the government had only fueled the fire. The surrender in Culiacán was not the end. It was the beginning. The decision to release Ovidio Guzmán did more than save lives that day. It sent a message that echoed across Mexico: the state can be forced to kneel. And once that message spread, the country would never be the same. Within days, rival cartels across Mexico reacted. In Jalisco, the New Generation Cartel, CJNG, celebrated privately. They saw the humiliation of the Mexican state as proof that power was no longer defined by governments, but by who could unleash the most terror. The Sinaloa Cartel, once fractured after El Chapo's arrest, was suddenly reborn. The Culiacanazo became their legend, their victory story. To the world, they were no longer just traffickers, they were an army capable of defeating a nation. But that same legend carried danger. Every rival cartel, the Zetas, the Gulf Cartel, Los Viagras, CJNG, now saw Sinaloa as a threat too powerful to ignore. If one cartel could bring down the state, what stopped them from taking over everything? In Michoacán, CJNG launched brutal offensives against smaller groups. In Tamaulipas, the Gulf Cartel sought to reclaim its old empire. And in Guerrero, the remnants of the Beltran Leyva organization smelled opportunity. Mexico was sliding into an arms race of terror. And the weapons of this new war were more advanced than ever. Cartels now flaunted .50 caliber Barrett sniper rifles, armored trucks called monstruos, and even drone bombs. The cartel battlefield was no longer shadows and whispers, it was open war. The United States watched nervously. Billions had been poured into Mexico's war on drugs. Training, weapons, intelligence, all meant to strengthen Mexico's hand. And yet, in Culiacán, it had all failed. For Washington, the nightmare was clear: if cartels could outgun Mexico, they could destabilize the region. The surrender also emboldened cartel propaganda. Videos of the Culiacanazo spread like wildfire. Young men across Sinaloa and beyond saw the cartels not as criminals, but as heroes who stood against the government. Recruitment surged. For every soldier that Mexico lost in trust, the cartels gained 10 new fighters. And what of Ovidio Guzmán himself? Though freed, he became more than just a fugitive. He became a symbol, proof that the Guzmán bloodline was untouchable. The Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, now ruled with a myth that no government could shatter. But symbols have enemies. Rivals plotted not only against Sinaloa, but against Ovidio himself. Rumors spread of assassination attempts, of betrayal within his own ranks. And all the while, the DEA quietly renewed its focus on him, determined not to let the humiliation of Culiacán stand. For civilians, the domino effect was merciless. Extortion, kidnappings, massacres, all surged in the months after. Where the government retreated, cartels advanced. Where trust was lost, fear took its place. And in every corner of Mexico, families asked the same question: who really rules this country? In Culiacán itself, the victory became a curse. Citizens whispered of pride but lived with fear. To celebrate was dangerous. To criticize was deadly. The city had become both the stage of the cartel's greatest triumph and the prison of its people. And internationally, the shockwaves spread further still. From Colombia to Europe, criminal groups studied the Culiacanazo as a playbook. The lesson was simple: with enough firepower, even governments can be forced to surrender. It was no longer just Mexico's story. It was a global warning. But the dominoes did not stop there. Every humiliation, every contradiction, every unanswered question from the government only fed the chaos. And in the shadows of that chaos, whispers began: the Culiacanazo would happen again. The question wasn't if, but when. And so, Mexico's enemies multiplied. Rivals grew bolder. Citizens grew more fearful. The state grew weaker. The dominoes had fallen, and in their place, a darker era of cartel power began. But the greatest test was still to come. Across the border, the Culiacanazo did not go unnoticed. In Washington, shock turned into fury. Billions of dollars had been spent arming and training Mexico to fight cartels. Yet, in a single day, all that investment seemed meaningless. Mexico had surrendered. In the face of that surrender was Ovidio Guzmán. For the DEA, it was personal. Ovidio wasn't just another trafficker, he was the heir of El Chapo Guzmán. The son of the man who embarrassed U.S. authorities with his dramatic escapes. The Culiacanazo was proof that history could repeat itself. And this time, Washington vowed it would not. Reports flooded in. Ovidio was not just hiding, he was expanding. The Chapitos controlled meth labs, fentanyl routes, and smuggling corridors that stretched deep into the United States. Every pill, every gram, every overdose linked back to Sinaloa. And for U.S. officials, that meant Ovidio was now more than a fugitive. He was a threat to American soil. In private, the pressure began. High-level calls between Washington and Mexico City grew tense. American officials demanded Ovidio's capture. Mexico hesitated. The scars of Culiacán were fresh. Could they risk unleashing another battle? But Washington's patience was thin. The DEA, FBI, and even the Pentagon weighed options. Secret briefings considered covert operations, cross-border raids, even special forces involvement. The idea was unthinkable, but the fury was real. The message was clear: if Mexico would not take Ovidio, America would. Meanwhile, Ovidio moved carefully. He knew the spotlight was on him. The Chapitos enforced stricter security, surrounding him with armored convoys, private intelligence, and loyal sicarios. Every movement was calculated, every risk weighed. He was untouchable in Sinaloa, but the net around him was tightening. The U.S. tightened the screws in other ways. Sanctions targeted cartel finances. Informants were recruited in secret. The flow of weapons across the border was monitored more aggressively. It was not just a war of bullets anymore, it was a war of money, politics, and intelligence. And in the shadows, whispers of betrayal surfaced. The DEA claimed to have eyes inside the cartel. Anonymous voices spoke of Ovidio's hideouts, his routines, his weaknesses. The Chapitos had enemies, and some of them were willing to sell information to the highest bidder. In Mexico, this pressure created tension at the highest levels. The military wanted revenge for their humiliation. Politicians feared bloodshed. And the president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, repeated his mantra, abrazos, no balazos, hugs, not bullets. A message of peace, in a country on fire. But the U.S. wasn't satisfied. Behind closed doors, American officials hinted at harsher measures. Talk of designating cartels as terrorist organizations emerged. If that happened, it would open the door for U.S. military strikes inside Mexico, a nightmare scenario for both governments. Ovidio, for his part, became a ghost. Rarely seen, always protected. To his enemies, he was a target. To his followers, a legend. To the United States, a priority. The Battle of Culiacán had turned him into a figure larger than life, and every passing month only increased the pressure. But here was the paradox: the more the U.S. demanded his capture, the more dangerous that capture became. Everyone remembered Culiacán. Everyone remembered the buses burning, the gunmen flooding the streets, the fear. If they tried again, what would happen? Would Mexico burn twice as bright, or collapse altogether? The U.S. was not alone in its pressure. European nations, battling fentanyl and cocaine epidemics, raised alarms. International law enforcement coordinated more closely. The world's most powerful governments were focused on one man, a man who had once been freed because of the fear his capture unleashed. And yet, through it all, Ovidio remained free. Living in the very city where the government once bowed to him. Every day that passed was both a triumph and a countdown. Because the United States would not let it go. And Mexico knew it. The stage was being set for another confrontation, one that could be even bloodier than the first. The pressure was mounting. The U.S. was watching. Mexico was trembling. And Ovidio was waiting. The world was about to learn that the Culiacanazo was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. 3 years passed after the Culiacanazo. 3 years where the Mexican government avoided Ovidio like a phantom. 3 years where Washington's pressure grew louder, stronger, impossible to ignore. And then, in January 2023, the hunt returned to Culiacán. Unlike 2019, there would be no hesitation. No more humiliation. This time, the operation would be planned in absolute secrecy. Elite units moved into place under the cover of darkness. Helicopters hovered silently above. And as the city slept, Mexican forces prepared to strike at the heart of the Sinaloa Cartel once again. At dawn, the silence shattered. Gunfire erupted as military convoys encircled Ovidio's hideout. The Chapitos' men responded instantly, pouring bullets into the streets. Civilians woke to the sound of war, not in some distant battlefield, but outside their own homes. Ovidio was trapped. Mexican forces stormed the property, cutting down resistance. Unlike 2019, there would be no negotiation, no retreat. This time, they dragged Ovidio out alive, cuffed, disoriented, furious. The son of El Chapo was finally theirs. But the price of this victory was about to be revealed. The city of Culiacán exploded. Sicarios swarmed the streets, unleashing hell. Burning vehicles blocked every major road. Heavy machine guns rattled from rooftops. Convoys of armored trucks roared through neighborhoods, turning residential blocks into battle zones. It was the Culiacanazo all over again, but this time, deadlier. Reports flooded in: cartel gunmen attacked the local airport, desperate to stop Ovidio's extraction. Passengers screamed as bullets ripped through terminals. Entire families were trapped on planes as gunfire rained from the tarmac. Chaos reigned, and no one, not even the innocent, was safe. Military helicopters fired from above. Cartel gunmen responded with .50 caliber rifles, weapons capable of piercing armor and bringing aircraft down. For hours, the city became a battlefield between the Mexican state and the Chapitos. But unlike 2019, there was no retreat. This time, the government held its ground. Soldiers fought block by block, forcing cartel gunmen back. The cost was staggering: over 30 people dead, countless wounded, entire neighborhoods scarred. Yet amid the destruction, the government declared victory. Ovidio Guzmán was finally in custody. As news broke, shockwaves rippled across the world. The United States celebrated. The DA announced that justice was closing in. Washington demanded extradition. And once again, Ovidio became a symbol of defiance, of fragility, of a war that never truly ends. But in Mexico, the victory was hollow. Families mourned loved ones killed in the crossfire. Streets bore scars of burning vehicles and shattered homes. Civilians whispered the same question they had asked in 2019: had it been worth it? And within the cartel itself, the war only deepened. The Chapitos still held power. Their men still controlled the streets. And though Ovidio was gone, his brothers, Ivan, Alfredo, and Joaquin, vowed revenge. Culiacán had burned, but the Sinaloa Cartel lived on. Even in chains, Ovidio remained a symbol. To some, proof that the state had not completely surrendered. To others, proof that the cartels would never truly be defeated. His arrest was a victory, but also a reminder of the cost of challenging the cartels in their own stronghold. And so, the story of the Culiacanazo came full circle. In 2019, Ovidio was freed because the city burned. In 2023, he was captured, and the city burned again. The difference? This time, the government refused to surrender. But the flames still consumed everything in their path. And as Ovidio awaits extradition to the United States, one haunting question lingers: when the government and the cartels clash, who really wins? Mexico's streets have answered before, and they may answer again. Because in the war against the cartels, there are no victories. Only battles. And only survivors. This is the story of Culiacán. A city that twice burned. A city that twice surrendered. In a war that is far from over. If you've stayed with us through this journey into Culiacán, thank you. Stories like this aren't easy to tell, but they must be heard. If you believe more people should know the truth behind the cartels, the battles, and the lives caught in between, share this video. And if you want to go deeper into the untold stories of the cartels, subscribe. Every week, we uncover the hidden battles, the corruption, the betrayals, and the human cost of this war. This was the city that surrendered to the cartel. I'll see you in the next story.